Hello my dear friends and welcome to my channel. In today's video we have a story about entitled mother and her child who is a bully. She tried to trick OP, so OP called the police on her. It's an interesting one, so subscribe if you haven't and I hope you'll enjoy these crazy stories. A bit of backstory. My parents got divorced 33 years ago and at the time they both owned several houses. When they separated their assets, my mother got the home she lives in now and my father got the home he lives in now, but he tried to still take the home she lives in by not paying the mortgage payments and not telling her he hadn't paid the mortgage. Had it not been for my godfather loaning my mom the money to get the payments up to date, my father would have put my mother and his 3 kids out on the street. Fast forward 28 years later. My father owned his own business and he was looking for someone to buy it, and so my sister offered to buy it from him. They agreed on price and signed the contract. Now here's the rub. The business was actually a business that was losing customers because it's a dying industry and my father never told my sister that. My sister is one of the hardest workers I know and she put everything she had into this business and nothing she was doing was working. And that wasn't because she wasn't doing the right thing, it was because the business in and of itself was a dying medium for that industry. During the course of all this, after my father had finally retired, they got into an argument about a financial matter in dealing with the company and my father was completely disrespectful in the way he handled it towards my sister and he did that in front of her employees. My sister stopped talking to him at that point. Over the next couple of months, despite my sister's extensive hard work, the company went under and my sister had to close the business after it had been open for 38 years. My mother was afraid that if something happened to her we wouldn't get the house, so she put the house in my sister's name. Since my sister lived the closest the house was still in my mother's name as well, but my sister's name was added to it. After my mom got out of the hospital she never got around to changing it. So when my father started threatening to sue, my sister went through her assets and realized that my mother's house was still in her name and switched it back over to just my mother's name. In our state, however, we have a law that if you think someone fraudulently switches an asset out of their name in order to avoid being sued for it, you can sue them for that asset still, and it's up to them to prove that it wasn't fraudulently transferred. So when my father decided to sue my sister, he added my mother's house to the lawsuit as one of the things he wanted. He didn't sue my sister for the house that she owns in her name with her husband in a whole another city. He sued her for a house she hasn't lived in over 25 years and a house that she has not put any money into ever in her life. Now when he first filed the suit I thought he was just trying to force my sister to talk to him because I couldn't imagine any parent, let alone my parents, actually suing their child, but he actually went through with it. He initially told me that he was suing for my mother's house because the lawyer told him he had to sue for all of her assets, and since my mother's house had been in her name, he had to sue for that as well as her house. But then I found out he wasn't suing her for her house, he was suing her only for my mother's house. He's still mad that he didn't get my mother's house 33 years ago when they got a divorce, so mad that he lost in that case, that he decided to go after her house the first chance he got, and this was 33 years later. The even more messed up thing is that when I found out he was going after my mother's house, I myself told him, if you go through with this lawsuit and you win my mother's house and you take her house away from her, I will never forgive you, I will never talk to you again, you will lose me, and losing me will also mean you lose your grandchild. Your only grandchild, so you need to think about whether or not this is worth it to you, and he still went through with it, knowing that he would not only lose my sister but me as well. He filed this lawsuit 5 years ago, and they just got through going to court, so for the last 5 years he's forced his daughter, his princess, his baby girl, to suffer under the weight of knowing that her father A. screwed her over and B. was putting money before her and C. apparently felt no real remorse or sadness to hurting his own child, emotionally, mentally, and financially. The worst part is he didn't just teach her that, he taught all 3 of his kids with this one act. He did all of this because he thinks that even though he got everything in the divorce, with the exception of primary custody of us kids and that one house, that he is entitled to take my mom's house after 33 years of her living there, putting all of her time and energy into making it a home for us kids. And putting her own money into improving it and her paying off a mortgage on her own as a single mother, while raising 3 teenage children on what would be considered poverty wages today. We grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. He hasn't put a dime into that property since 1988, and yet he somehow feels like he's entitled to take it away from my mother, without even caring about the damage it would do to his own children. And you know how some people have some idea in their head that it's okay to mistreat your kid if they're not your biological kids, like a stepchild or foster child or an adoptive child, which I think is disgusting in its own right, but there are people out there who actually believe that. So for those out there who actually believe that it's okay to mistreat your child if they're not your biological child, I say this, it's not like we're like his stepchildren or foster children or children he adopted, or any other random crazy excuse that some random people try to use to justify their own abuse of their children. We're his biological flesh and blood, and there's no denying it because we look very similar to him and his family. I just can't stop thinking, what kind of sick idiot sues their own kid? Update. I commented on this down below, but I thought I'd add this update for those who asked. A lot of people here have said that my sister needed to do her due diligence in examining the business. My sister did examine all of the business records for the last 10 years, and she had a lawyer go over the contract with a fine-tooth comb. It wasn't a matter of her not doing her due diligence. It was a matter of the business records that she was given were very different from the business records that held the actual information necessary. For lack of a better way to say it, he cooked the books, and for those wondering the outcome, she actually did file a countersuit for him selling her a business that was unviable. She was able to prove in court that the business was failing before he sold it to her, and that the equipment he sold her was equipment that he had bought 20 years ago and was no longer usable when it came to the technology of today. Also, I was already pretty sure that no jury worth their salt would give him a house that my sister never put a dime in and hadn't lived in for over 25 years, especially when he wasn't going after any of her other assets. I was right. When they got to court, my sister told the judge and the jury that she didn't want anything from him in her countersuit. She didn't want money, he didn't want anything from him, but for this to be over. He told the court and the jury, but he just wanted my mother's house in lieu of the $300,000 my sister owed him for the business. My father lost his lawsuit. My sister won her lawsuit and was given $0 as that's what she was asking for. So he permanently lost one daughter, and the other one, myself, is seriously questioning whether or not I want to talk to him ever again. Over the last 10 years I've maintained a relationship with my father, not because it's what he wanted, but because it's what I wanted. Now I just don't know if that's something I want anymore. I don't know if I want to be around the kind of person that could sue his own child. Update 2. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their comments and their concerns, regardless of whether or not I agreed with them. You take time out of your day to give me your opinion, and that is truly appreciated. For those who were wondering, I did try to have a relationship with my father to some extent again, after telling him exactly how I felt about what he did and making it clear to him that those were my feelings and they weren't going to change. Unfortunately, my father is my father, and I ended up not being able to put aside what he had done from who he is, because at the end of the day what he had done is directly a result of who he is. So I've stopped talking to him for the time being. Ironically, the thing that got me there was an argument over lettuce. Basically, he wanted to give me lettuce that I would never use, and I repeatedly told him I would never use it, but he kept insisting that I come over and get it. But at the end of the day, I basically realized that at my emotional state right now, even if I wanted to have a relationship with him, I can't, because I'm too angry, hurt, and disgusted by what he did. I'm a person who used to believe that family was everything, and I don't anymore because of his actions, and that is devastating to me, so I just believe that right now I'm better off not talking to him. I want to thank you again for your kind words and your caring concern. I'm sorry, but it sounds like you lost a dad. Or at least the image you had of him. He's a crooked businessman, a spiteful ex, and a cruel father. Okay people, I thought I'd share a story from when I was younger and when my children were still young. So this takes place in the summer of 1975. At the time my sons were 9 and 7, also they were in the Cub Scouts. Like most kids, they quickly made friends with the other kids, and as a dad, I made friends with the other dads that volunteered. Most of us got along well with the families, except for the entitled mother and her son. The mother was extremely clueless about her own son and basically refused to parent him. She was more into the lifestyle of a mom, being in mommy groups and spending her husband's money rather than being a good parent to her son. The dad was a good person but worked a lot, so he was absent. Her 9-year-old son was a notorious bully. He was overly aggressive, he hit other children, stole items, and was extremely disrespectful towards other adults. When the other parents brought this up, she would make constant excuses for him. He's just a boy. He's just expressing himself. Your kid started it. What made it worse was that the entitled mother would pacify her son's behavior with sweets, toys, and other things that he wanted. Because of this, the other parents and I didn't invite the mother and her son to events that took place outside of Scouts. The entitled mother would often call our home about getting sleepovers or having her son play with our kids, which we were adamant about not happening. If we didn't give in, she said, "You're bullying my son by excluding him. How could you do that to a child?" So late June, the other parents and I were talking about a beach trip to Santa Cruz and bringing our families with us. We talked through everything among the 10 other moms and dads about planning this out. The entitled mother must have overheard what we were saying because she just came over with her son and said, "Can you take my son with you? I have to do something with my husband." "What? Where?" "To Santa Cruz." "Oh no. You and your son are not invited. This is a friends-only trip." "You're a big meanie," kicks me in the leg and runs away. "Look what you did. Child hater." She leaves and chases after him. Because this was a big trip, we decided to go shopping and hit the road on Friday. We had to do lots of shopping in bulk to reasonably feed 12 adults and 18 kids. My wife and I, along with 4 other parents, were watching the cars and keeping the kids occupied. For a brief moment, I turned my attention to my car to turn the AC up cause my kid said that they were hot. I turn over and the entitled boy is there with his bag and the mom peeling out in her station wagon. We are all just in shock, asking ourselves, is this really happening to us? The boy's mother gave him a note that had his allergies and an emergency phone number. We call, no answer. We can't leave the kid here alone, and we're not going to bring him with us, so we opted to call the police. We put the kid in the car to keep him out of the sun, and we made the call. We report entitled mother for the abandonment of her child. They sent an officer out in 15 to 20-ish minutes. The other parents and I go back to our cars to look out for the police. When we get back, entitled boy is pulling my 4-year-old daughter's hair. The reason why? The kids had some snacks in the cooler and didn't want to share them with entitled boy. What later proceeded as we were running to the car is 10 of the boys pull the entitled boy off my daughter and proceed to beat his butt. Now the kids had 2 years of rage towards this kid bottled up inside, so what took place wasn't surprising. The entitled kid is bleeding, crying. He says that we're all mean and started demanding food from us. He was cussing us out, hitting things, and said, "I want to go on the trip. I want to go on the trip. I want to go on the trip now." He kept parroting this over and over again. I yelled to him, "Shut up," which only made him cry more. Now I will admit I was probably in the wrong here. But this is one of the few children I have truly hated in my life. The police arrived soon after and we explained what happened. Apparently, he was dropped off at his father's job. The mother received a child neglect charge. When she saw that our kids beat up hers, she tried to charge our kids for assault. It was dropped because it was self-defense. But all in all, my friends and our kids had a great week in Santa Cruz. If you wonder what happened to entitled mom and son, the mom is still married to the dad. We haven't talked to her since our kids aged out of Scouts. The son is a 55-year-old man-child who is a creep that tries to pick up college girls, and he neglects his 4 kids. Well, that's my story. That's all, folks. Edit. Many people are saying that I condone what happened to entitled boy. I don't. People say that I should have extended compassion. But what would you do if your daughter was crying and being harassed? Also, I was in a distance where they were somewhat far away. So the other parents couldn't break up the fight immediately. How the fight started is the boy wanted a snack from the cooler. If he had asked nicely, the kids or I would have likely given him something. There is a difference between being firm and heartless while allowing someone to treat you horribly and get away with it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. I understand that the children decided to take revenge on this boy for all the humiliation, but still it seems to me that this is cruel and parents should raise their children better. This is one thing that I can't stand about my mom. I'm 25 and moved out but live in the same city. Somehow she always manages to volunteer me for errands or services for others. You need someone to pick up grandpa from the airport. Oh, my name, can do it. Someone to look over your resume. My name, Will, ask her. Want to go see my name's apartment? She lives right down the street, let's go. No asking me, no giving me any warning beyond maybe 10 minutes, and if I can't do what she's volunteered me for because I have other plans or errands to run, it makes me look like an idiot. I've started putting my foot down, but every time I tell her no she either calls me lazy or she pulls this pitiful look like I'm the worst daughter ever who has just punched her in the face. I tell her no regardless. Now, every time she volunteers me for something, my go-to response is to call her out. Instead of sorry, I can't do that, I let everyone know I'm sorry that mom's name told you I could do this. She didn't check with me first and I do not have the time. It may seem subtle, but now people's frustrations have been directed back on her instead of me. She hates it, but knows I'm right, so any retaliation has been limited to the pitiful look from before. She still hasn't stopped volunteering me though, I just wonder how long it will take for her to learn. OP, you should move out as soon as you can, your mother is insanely rude. She is just using you for her purposes, you don't deserve to be treated like that. Guys, if you end up liking this video please consider subscribing, and if you missed the last episode on the channel I'm gonna link it right here. There is the story about a rude and shameless guy and his mom who was sure what he did was right. Check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you in my next video.